Today we're going to talk about naming triangles. Triangles can be named according to their side lengths, or they can be named according to their angles, or you can do a combination of both. Let's start first with naming by their sides. There are 3 different names for triangles if you're measuring them by side length: equilateral, isosceles, and scalene. Let's look into each of these a little bit more. An equilateral triangle is a triangle where all 3 sides are equal. So if one side is 5 centimeters, then all the sides are 5 centimeters. These are examples of equilateral triangles. You might also see the lines that indicate all 3 of these sides are the same length. So this way, even if, like for example, this one looks like this bottom side might be a little longer, if you see that line there, then it just means the picture was not drawn to scale, which means it wasn't perfectly measured. But even though it doesn't look perfect, the information you are receiving is that all 3 sides are equal. Therefore, this is an equilateral triangle. Next up is isosceles. An isosceles triangle has at least 2 sides that are equal. This third side might be a different length, but at least 2 of them are equal to each other. A scalene triangle has all 3 sides that are different lengths. You might see it with measurements, or you might see it simply with different numbers of little lines through them. You can see that 1 line is not the same as 2 lines, which is not the same as 3 lines. So these are all 3 different measurements, even if there are no numbers there for you to see. Just looking at this picture, you will be expected to know that this is a, oh, hold on, that one looks like it's 2 lines. This is a scalene triangle. All right, now let's talk about the angles. There are 3 names for different types of angle measurements. The first one is acute angles. Next up are right angles. And finally, obtuse angles. There are other angle names, but not that are used in triangles. These are the only 3 angles you'll find in a triangle. Acute angles are anything greater than 0, even if it's really, really tiny, like 1/10, all the way up to less than 90. So even if it's 89 and 9/10 or 89 and 999 thousandths, anything that is less than 90 but greater than 0 is an acute angle. I like to think of them as cute, tiny little angles. So for example, when we looked at our equilateral triangle, all 3 angles in an equilateral triangle are acute angles. Acute angles are the most common type you'll see in a triangle, because every type of triangle will have at least 2 acute angles. To be called acute, though, it has to have all 3 angles being acute. Next up is a right triangle. A right triangle actually only needs 1 angle that is right. It will be shown with the little square in the corner. If you do not see that little square, or there are no words telling you that it is a right triangle, you cannot make the assumption that that is exactly 90 degrees. And it has to be exactly 90 degrees to be called a right triangle. Now notice There are two acute angles in here, but we are not calling this a right acute or an acute triangle. Because it has this one 90-degree angle, we are calling this triangle a right triangle. Last but not least is an obtuse angle. Obtuse means anything that is greater than 90. So it could be like 90 and 1/100th. That is technically greater than 90. All the way to less than 180. So it could be 179 and 9/10, but it could not be 180. Here's an example of an obtuse triangle. So this angle here is my obtuse angle. It's bigger than 90 degrees. I do still have two acute angles here, but this one green obtuse angle means we're going to call the whole triangle obtuse. Let's practice a few. Think for a second, or pause the video if you need to. What would you call this triangle? I would call this an acute, because all the angles are acute, an acute equilateral. Fun fact about equilateral triangles, all three angles are actually the same number. So an equilateral triangle, three angles that are all the same that add up to 180, always has 60-degree angles. There is a relationship that I will talk about in another video between the side lengths and the angle measurements, but this acute triangle means that all these angles are less than 90. It's equilateral, so all the sides are equal, and it just happens to be that all the angles then are equal as well. Let's try another one. This makes it a right triangle. If two sides are equal, this would be a right isosceles triangle, because at least these two sides are equal. You can also have a right scalene triangle when all three sides are different lengths. Scalene, hardest part about math is the spelling, goodness. Scalene triangle. So we'll keep practicing these, but we need to know that there are three names to talk about side lengths, three names to talk about angle measurements, and they can be combined in different ways.